It also concluded that an individual at Disney Animation TV may have seen copyrighted materials for Bucky prior to beginning the development for Moana.
These cases never win. Never. 1 in a million.
Renegade Online. Moana 2, copyright lawsuit as animator revives the idea of theft claims. Buck Woodall claims awards contender stole ideas from a screenplay he wrote, while Disney says the works are not similar. Now, what's interesting about this is he tried to do this a few years back with the first Moana. Apparently was denied, I believe, thanks to statute limitations having expired. But now Moana 2 is out, and he's taken another crack at this. So, Ron, this was for you to kind of weigh in on, see what you think here.
Not being familiar with the facts, of course. Not being familiar with the facts. I can say this. These cases never win. Never. 1 in a million.
So is it a PR play or a quick settlement play, Ron?
No, I believe that he, in all probability, is sincere and may even be right.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the facts involved here for the audience.
Let's do that, please.
With a little more than a week left before Academy Awards nominations are set to be announced, Disney has been sued for allegedly copying the idea for Moana and its sequel. Animator Buck Woodall, in a lawsuit filed on Friday in California federal court, claims Disney ripped off elements of a screenplay he wrote for an animated film called Bucky. Both works, which are set against the backdrop of an ancient Polynesian village, follow teenagers who defy their parents by embarking on a dangerous voyage to save their homes while encountering spirits manifested as animals along the way. The filing of Friday's lawsuit follows a court ruling in November that Disney didn't have to face an identical copyright lawsuit brought by Woodall over Moana, the first one. He sued because he sued too late. The release of Moana 2 allowed him to initiate further legal action. In that case, the court found that a jury should decide whether the works at issue are substantially similar if the statute of limitations had not passed. It also concluded that an individual at Disney Animation TV may have seen copyrighted materials for Bucky prior to beginning the development for Moana, which was released in 2016. There is a disputed issue of genuine fact regarding substantial similarity and striking similarity between the parties' works, wrote U.S. District Judge Consuelo Marshall in the order. Moana 2, which may garner an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Feature, debuted to $224 million at the box office, smashing numerous records on its way to the biggest five-day opening in history. The original grossed at least $687 million worldwide. Disney didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, no surprise there. But starting in 2003, Woodall says he provided the screenplay and a trailer for Bucky to former Mandeville Films Director of Development Jenny Marchick, now DreamWorks Animation's head of development for features. She allegedly asked about providing further materials, including character designs, production plans, and storyboards, by assuring him she could greenlight the film. At the time, Mandeville had a first-look deal with Disney and had offices on its facilities in Burbank, according to the complaint. The lawsuit also points to similarities between Moana and Bucky. One example, both celebrate a recurring theme of the Polynesian belief in spiritual ancestors manifested as animals. Other similarities include the protagonist's journey, starting with a turtle, a plot involving a symbolic necklace, a main character who encounters a demigod adorned with a giant hook and tattoos, and a giant creature that's concealed within a mountain. This was all in Moana, like every bit of this, almost verbatim. So it makes it interesting here. We've got a judge who seems somewhat interested in this, but Ron, what you think there? You still muted.
There is a concept called scene faire. Pardon my French. I'm sure it doesn't sound anything like that. But in script origin copyright cases, it basically stands for the proposition that setting up a scenario, setting up a, Polynesian teens. What was the opening paragraph that you described?
The description of what he wrote?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So no, slow down. The previous one.
Yeah. You
both
talk
saw
about
later recurring theme of the Polynesian belief in spiritual ancestor. In other words, there are two things. One is the mise en scene, which is what's the concept? High concept, right? Mm-hmm. Very hard to win and say this was my concept. So then you go to the script similarities. The more of those you can plot, the better you're going to do. But there is a great deal of judicial hostility to these cases in California and New York, which is almost essentially where they're only filed. And for all practical purposes, they're overwhelmingly filed in California without seeing the analysis. It doesn't help that they lost the first time out, even though it was apparently on the ground of the statute of limitations. That could make things even harder this time. But
it's also, and Ron, curious what you think about this. It's also really, really hard when Maui, which is one of the characters in Moana, is a demigod who has a hook, because the demigod in that religion, in the Polynesian religion, is named Maui with a hook. So really hard to win that one. When, it's kind of like, oh no, you used Zeus in your story. I had Zeus in my story 5 years ago too.
And he had lightning bolts.
Oh, we thought the same thing same time.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's right. In other words, you would need to know how original indeed are these elements.
Mm-hmm.
And
listen, maybe they ripped him completely off. I don't know.
Well, it's people who submit scripts on spec and who don't even people who have existing relationships have had their scripts ripped off in Hollywood. It's the reason there are so many of these. Look, a lot of these. I had what I thought was a very good case. Usually, when you hear me say that first sentence, it means that I lost it. I ended up not filing it, but someone came to me with a very good script ripoff case, and there was a plausible chain of copying. And one of the interesting things was that there was even a scene about the protagonist of the movie that was completely invented by the scriptwriter, prospective client, that ended up in the movie that was shot. And yet the claim was never brought up by me or anyone else, because it's just such an uphill battle. But there are, in the process of considering that case, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of these cases. Some of them are wacky. Sometimes people think they invented the hook. They think they invented light, whatever, But I'd like to know who the lawyer is actually, because I do know some of the people who work in this space. So maybe next time we talk, I'll have had a chance to look at this case and we'll talk about it in some more detail.
Ron, how many of these get settled though? I mean, I know you say none of them get won, but how many of them get settled just because the company says, here's $500, go away?
Well, if you call that settled.
Right.
I'm not counting that as a settlement. Okay. That barely pays your filing fee. A settlement is, 5 figures of money or something.
I was gonna say, but from my memory, not many.
No, I'm not. Well, you tend to not hear, but
it's kind of an admission of guilt by the studio. And the only one that I could think of that may have had any sort of settlement involved was the Frequency case, I think. And I could be wrong on that. I'd have to look. There
is a big premium on confidentiality when you do settle a case like this. So it's unlikely that we will ever really know how many, to answer your question, how many are settled. But studios have, I don't know if you guys have picked up on this in the course of your work, studios have a lot of money. And it's bad for their business model to ever be seen as giving in on this stuff. these cases are probably not even handled by insurance companies because they're probably so low level in terms of the risk that they probably are dealt with at the self-retained co-insurance level, which is basically what we would call deductible. So whoever, Buck Woodall, I don't know him. I don't know the case. I haven't read it, but cases like this are really, really tough to win. What you really need in a case like this is, an email or a text from the studio saying, thanks for your script. I don't think we're going to buy it, but I think we're going to use it. It would have to be that level of smoking gun.
And even then, it's real tough, right? Because like you said, it's like a chain of who knew about something.
Think of how many levels there are by the time you get to the studio that actually produces it. How many people have optioned it? How many people have looked at it? Who did the treatment? Who did the rewrite? It is a really tough and the reason to ever bring a case like this is that if you really do have, the upside on a really big film is really meaningful, but it's a super hard kind of claim.
Well, one of the things that came to my mind while we were talking, I had never thought about this, but it just popped in there to copy the Ghostbusters line. Sorry, Ray. You hear about this way more when it comes to the music side of things. So you'll hear way more often that somebody copied, bars of music or lyrics or whatever, and then those sometimes do get settled more easily. I wonder if it's because the music is easier to track than something that's so large as a film that is so multimodal.
Well, that's one reason. Another reason is, so in a copyright case where you allege copying, you got to allege ownership of the copyright. You have to allege that yours came first. If yours was some kind of hit or was published or broadcast, you have to, if it became a hit, then fine. You're going to have in other words, the Shirelles, right? When they sued George Harrison over My Sweet Lord, He's So Fine. Mm-hmm. Obviously, George Harrison knew He's So Fine. He grew up in the right time. That works great. That is far more common than the movie situation where everything is done behind a veil of confidentiality or promised confidentiality. And as you say, Pro, there are all these different levels of development. The vast majority of pop songs are written, published, recorded, maybe not even in that order. So then there are these objective tests in the copyright case. How many bars are similar? How many melodic? How many chord progressions? And that's a whole industry. And I think there are a lot of judgment calls made in intellectual property claims. You remember the White Lines case a few years ago? I was rather surprised at the outcome of that, frankly. I thought that was a stretch. But you're right. It's much easier to get to the jury in a stolen song case than in a stolen script case.
Well, like I said, a story that I thought popped up today that I found interesting. I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I found it interesting considering everything else that's been going on lately with Disney. It was just, in fact, the last few days, there was an age discrimination suit that Disney had settled.
But remember, as Disney's a huge company.
Yep.
They're everywhere. They're involved. They have so many enterprises, and there are so many ways that they can make people unhappy, just like any company of that size. We might be more inclined to pay attention these days when there's a lawsuit against Disney, but sure, given the extent of their activities, I don't think they've all of a sudden become America's favorite pincushion.
No, I would agree with you there. I mean, we could go down the list of all the, every Fortune 500 company out there. It's why they have a standing legal department to kind of handle a variety of things that will come up on a routine basis.
And Disney's is the best of all of them. Just they're spectacular.
And just in my brief, going back and looking through things, I can't find really too many cases or any really where somebody won. Usually it goes into the studio. Even the frequency one, it looks like it's still possibly even ongoing. But like the more famous one was the Coming to America one, And
Right.
that one went on for how many years? Like, and again, and the music thing, you're right, Ron. The difference between music and some of these other things, it's a little bit more, you got a mathematical quantifiable thing to kind of apply with music, right? The My Sweet Lord, great example of a case. The Blurred Line ones is another great example of how I think that jury did not fundamentally understand what their job was going in that and trying to come out of that, because that song, regardless of if it has the same feeling as the Marvin Gaye song, it is clearly not the same song. And that opened the floodgates for these other cases now, where we've had just tons and tons of them on the music side. And that's the reason, is because that opened the doors. And that's kind of one of the reasons why they probably don't want to willy-nilly just allow one of these cases to go through when it comes to movies and television, because the next thing you know, you're gonna have a floodgate of other bunch of people. Well, I came up with a story just like that. And you guys brought up the point, the Moana thing. Here's the problem with this as a writer, somebody who has written things before and all this other stuff. Every idea that you think you've come up with, somebody else has already done it first. I'm sorry to tell you this. And especially this Moana case, it's gonna be tough because as you guys pointed out, you're using gods and stuff that exist already in the public domain. And if they have similar traits and all these things, that you're gonna come to the same conclusions. So the problem you'll have there is trying to convince a jury that it isn't. Maybe Ron can help me explain this, but where you wouldn't be able to both come to the same story ideas at the same conclusions with the same type of characters, because they come from the same place. Like if two people write a story about Robin Hood, they're both probably going to be very similar. You know what I mean? It's just the way it's going to work.
Tom, this is why I always write scripts that are so terrible that no person could have ever manifested such a thing. My Robin Hood has no arms and legs, and he rolls around through the forest.
That is a great strategy.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Rock and Rollin' Robin.
Darn it, Tom.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.